Okay, good morning everyone. Let's get settled. The subcommittee on the Committee on Justice and Human Rights on the bill, Senate Bill 2368, the Rights of Internally Displaced Persons Act, is hereby called to order. Una, let's acknowledge the, can I have the list? Comsec. Let's acknowledge the resource persons na nandito ngayon. Unang-una, maraming salamat sa pagdalo niyo today, no? Ay, ikaw na magbasa. Sige, go ahead.
Let me acknowledge the presence of our resource persons for this morning's hearing. We'll start with our representatives from the National Housing Authority. We have Ms. Visitacion Aloba, Mr. Wilfredo Cariquitan, and Ms. Lourdes Buensalida. From the National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Council, we have Ms. Lucky de la Cruz. From the Office of the Presidential Advisor on the Peace Process, we have Mr. Gonzalo Galang and Ms. Carla Ravanes. From the Armed Forces of the Philippines, we have Captain Gilberto Nohay and Lieutenant Colonel Gerald Naldoza. From the Commission on Human Rights, we have Director Karen Gomez Dumpit and Attorney Cecilia Jimenez. From the Department of Social Welfare and Development, we have Yusek Parisha Taraji. From the Office of the Presidential Assistant for Rehabilitation and Recovery, we have ASEC Gina de la Cruz. From the Department of Justice, we have Attorney Herminia Angeles Natividad. From the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, we have Mr. Bernard Kerbla. From the International Committee of the Red Cross, Attorney Yvcar Cruz Ferrer. We have Councilor Benjamin Gengona from Zamboanga City. From the Mindanao Tulong Bakwet, we have Executive Director Fairuds Rose Ibrahim Ebus. And we have Mr. Gamar Hassan, Ms. Ramada Jose, Ms. Emelita Montalban, and from Balay Rehabilitation Incorporated, we have Ms. Annalisa Ugay. Good morning.
Okay. Thank you so much, Comsec, for that. It's refreshing to have a hearing na hindi investigation, ano? The Philippines is among the countries with the largest population of internally displaced persons, or IDPs. Owing to many factors, the fact that our country is located along the typhoon belt and within the Pacific Rim of Fire, and of course the perennial insurgencies between the government and the armed groups. The catastrophic Typhoon Yolanda that hit Visayas, the 3-week Zamboanga standoff between the MNLF and the Armed Forces of the Philippines, and the catastrophic earthquake in Bohol are testaments to how internal displacement is of paramount public concerns. And IDPs are particularly vulnerable to all forms of exploitation and violence. Their socio-economic status, psychological state, physical health, and overall well-being take a heavy toll. And I'm sure the people here know that very well. They take a heavy toll as a result of the displacement. The very nature of the internal displacement puts them in particular danger. The state, therefore, needs to protect them, and they need special protection. And this bill exactly aims to promote and protect the rights of internally displaced persons and penalize the acts of arbitrary, I would like to emphasize, arbitrary internal displacement. We look forward to listening to your views and suggestions of everyone And again, I'd like to thank everyone for coming. And hopefully, we can have this bill made into law in the early part of next year. Okay. So we'll start today. I'd like to, my pinakapunto ngayon is to listen, maminaw sa tanan, so that we can get the input, so that we can come out with a bill that is better and richer and more aligned with its original goals. So maybe we can start with the National Director of the CHR IDP program, Attorney Cecilia Jimenez. Attorney Jimenez, good morning.
Good morning, Honorable Senator. Thank you very much for this opportunity to provide a short input on the importance of the bill concerning the plight of the IDPs in the Philippines. As the Honorable Senator has said, the situation of the IDPs in the Philippines actually calls for an enhanced, strengthened protection because they are many and because the Philippines have suffered from many causes of displacement. The bill that is in front of us for the Commission on Human Rights and the Commission on Human Rights IDP project, I think it's a very important step forward for the protection of the rights of IDPs. First of all, the bill follows the UN guiding principles on internal displacement very faithfully, and I think it is really an important obligation of the Philippine government to ensure that international standards, be it human rights or IHL, are actually implemented in the Republic of the Philippines. The second point that I would like to make is that the bill also formalizes and reiterates the primary duty of the state to provide protection and humanitarian assistance to IDPs within our jurisdiction, and that the Philippine government shall ensure compliance with their obligations under international law. It is, I think, ladies and gentlemen, very important to also reiterate that with the bill, it will also be much more formal and also legalized that the Philippine government has the obligation to establish conditions and provide means for IDPs to return voluntarily in safety and dignity to their homes and places of habitual residence, or to settle in other parts of the country. And last but not the least, it is also significant and essential that the IDPs' right to participation is recognized, because prior consultations with the IDPs and also during the management and planning of their return and rehabilitation is really essential, not only under international law, but also with emphasis on their constitutional right under the Philippine Constitution. It is also very essential, Honorable Senator, that aside from these obligations of the states, the bill for the very first time in Philippine legislation actually identifies arbitrary displacement as actually a crime. Of course, we have other sources whereby other sources in national law whereby the displacement is criminalized, for example, in the IHL law. However, it is very clear that under the proposed bill, arbitrary displacement that does not necessarily have to reach the threshold of war crimes and crimes against humanity is actually punished under the legislation. What is also very interesting for me as a lawyer, and I have worked in many internal displacement situations all over the world, is that this bill is actually forward-looking. Why? Because it actually even looks at development projects as a cause of internal displacement that have to be part and parcel of the analysis of internal displacement. And naturally, this is very relevant in the Philippines, where displacement, sir, is not only caused by natural disasters and armed conflict, but also by development projects. I will stop there, sir, and I am at your convenience for any questions.
Okay, thank you. Next resource persons will be the Commission on Human Rights. Director Karen Gomez-Dumpit.
Good morning, Your Honor. Let me just zero in on the full support of the Commission on Human Rights. We'd like to convey that. And we'd like to just say that in this particular bill, we are ready to assume our role as an institutional focal point for the IDPs and to have the following functions, which is actually in accordance with our constitutional mandates. This includes to monitor IDP conditions through the development of a system to track concerns, actions taken, and other relevant information to ensure that IDP rights are respected, protected, and fulfilled in all phases of internal displacement. The second, of course, is to conduct public inquiries, document violations of human rights, and work to ensure an effective response by concerned authorities for the protection and promotion of the human rights of internally displaced persons. The third is to investigate on our own or on complaint all forms of human rights violations against internally displaced persons involving civil and political rights and in accordance with Section 18 of Article 13 of the 1987 Constitution. And when found in the investigation that the filing of a case in court is warranted, we request the assistance of any department, bureau, office, or agency, such as the National Prosecution Service of the DOJ or the Ombudsman. We also restate here the constitutional mandate of the Commission to cite any person in contempt for violations of the orders issued by the Commission in accordance with the rules of court, to follow up on early warning and ensure effective measures to protect civilian population against arbitrary internal displacement, and to advise government on the rights of IDPs, formulate sound national policy and legislation, and to facilitate discussions to effectively address situations of internal displacement. We also want to undertake educational activities and training programs for state authorities, particularly with the Armed Forces of the Philippines, to hold public information drives and foster IDP participation and empowerment in the decision-making process regarding issues that concern them. At this point, let me also tackle, as you know, Your Honor, that this particular bill was actually vetoed by the President, and there were some contentious issues that were mentioned referring to our mandate as previously envisaged in the bill of the 15th Congress that was approved. With respect to the provisions on damages, which unlawfully differentiates between displacements caused by security agents of the state and other entities, as the veto message says, we have already included in the bill a revised formulation which says that the CHR shall enhance its existing financial assistance program, and it no longer relates to damages, but to include financial assistance for the purposes of facilitating reparation, return, local integration, and resettlement elsewhere of IDPs. And our current financial assistance program has a cap of 10,000 per person, and this is what we are offering to the body. And then, of course, we said that in the veto message, it also said that the power granted to the CHR to determine damages incurred against IDPs and facilitate award of such claims is a power that belongs exclusively to the judiciary. We accepted that particular veto message, and we said that in the formulation or reformulation in damages section, a court of competent jurisdiction shall determine the damages inflicted against NDPs and direct the persons responsible for arbitrary internal displacement to award monetary compensation under the following circumstances. So there are circumstances that we actually laid out in the in this particular section. These views have been also put forward in the House of Representatives, and it has been adopted in the substitute bill that was approved in the House of Representatives, Your Honor. So we welcome, and we, of course, offer to you our services and any assistance that we can make so that this bill can finally pass the Senate, Your Honor. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Yes, at least klaro na ngayon na wala na kayong power to give damages, to grant damages, no? So that we can remove all obstacles. Okay, Ms. Annalisa Ugay, the Executive Director of Balay Rehabilitation Incorporated. Ma'am, you have anything to add? Say?
Just a correction, I'm not executive director, I'm just an advocacy officer.
Okay.
I would rather show our statement in the form of images because Balay has been working for this IDP bill for 10 years, and there's a lot already of discussion in terms of legalities and some veto messages. And I think I just want to walk through with you the images of the IDPs we're talking about.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead. Okay, Ms. Annalisa, I think you made your message clear. Siguro lipat na tayo sa IDP testimonies. Let's start with man-made calamity, the one caused by the fighting in Zamboanga City. So we have Mr. Gamar Hassan of Rio Hondo of Zamboanga City. Mr. Hassan, magandang umaga po.
Magandang umaga po.
Panahon mo na.
Assalamualaikum means peace be unto you. Buenos dias a todo and good morning. Section 7, letter A, line 18 to 20 of IDP Senate Bill number 2368, introduced by the good Senator T.J. Gengona, we should have avoided or at least minimized displacement and loss of property of 10,560 houses in Zamboanga City during the siege with MNLF rebels who wanted to have their caravan parade at the city proper. If all feasible alternatives have been explored, if all measures were undertaken, if we have only talked for negotiations, supervised the rules of engagement in our PNP and AFP, if we don't only think that other people is different from us, as if we only love one another as God creation. I am Gamar Hassan, an IDP and resident of Barangay Riondo, Zamboanga City. I served the barangay government for 18 years as Sangguniang Kabataan official to barangay official consecutively till 2010. Riondo is the oldest founded barangay in Zamboanga City, where the Spaniards in 17th century resided, together with the sea gypsies they called Bajau. In fact, the word Riondo derived from the Spanish term for deep river. The population is 11,470 individuals, where 99.8% are Muslims, 80% are below the poverty level of the government survey recently. The main livelihood of the residents are fishing, seaweed farming, as market vendors engage in small entrepreneurship with microfinance assistance. My barangay suffered the most during the Zamboanga siege last year. That was 2 months after Yolanda in Tacloban. That 95% of the houses and properties in the barangay, that equivalent to 2,500 houses, were burned or burned down during the firefights for this particular barangay alone. Since this is a committee hearing of the Honorable Senate for the draft of IDP bill for its final approval, I'll be mentioning some lapses from the LGU, national level, and all actors involved in preventing the man-made calamities, such as this, and the intervention of the government, stakeholders, and partners, so that somehow we may consider or reconsider propositions that may apply, mentioned by my colleagues here from Tacloban and from Cotabato, wherein the firefight started in September 9, 2013. Nobody is allowed to go out of the barangay, and if you are fortunately enough went out of the barangay within the affected areas, never be allowed to return back. 20,000 residents of the two adjacent barangays of Riondo and Mariki were trapped for 4 days without food supply. Even the DSWD's food assistance and relative helps outside of the prohibited area.
Excuse me. You said 4 days without food and...
Yes, sir.
Okay.
In Barangay Riondo and Mariki.
Okay.
So, binabanggit ko po ito para sa ganun, meron tayong pwedeng ma-add sa bill na yan para maprotektahan yung karapatan namin mabuhay na hindi kayo matrap dun sa loob. Trap for 4 days without food supply. Even the DSWD's food assistance and relatives help outside the barangay are also prohibited to come in. We were surrounded by military as if all of us were rebels. That only after 4 days with the negotiations of the 3 cities, Zamboanga City councilors with the Crisis Management Committee or CMC during that time, only then were allowed to go out from danger, provided not to bring things aside from our personal belongings and possessions. Under these circumstances, in Section 9, letter G, number 126, page 11, on the said bill, talks on property and possessions must be strengthened further to include the transportation of properties of IDPs for its safety during the war, not just on recovery of it. We commend, Mr. Chairman, the bravery and recognize the action of the 3 city councilors, namely City Councilors Jimenez, City Councilor Pareja, and City Councilor Sadain, who saved most of our lives. Honorable Chairman, my way of delivering our position is by questions. Number 1, our first question would be, are there any provisions in any law, particularly the United Nations Guiding Principle for Internally Displaced Law, or UNPID law, on not allowing people to leave from their localities during the war, just to escape from danger? 4 days are fatal, especially for the children and women. After the transfer of the family members to the designated evacuation centers and relatives outside the affected areas, men in every households in our locality chose not to leave to man the community from ransackers and thieves. I guess, Councilor Bijing Gingona here and Nonong Gingona, the former councilor of Zamboanga City, already submitted their affidavits to the group of Honorable Committee Chairman on Human Rights, Congressman Romarato, during the congressional inquiry last February 2014. The vaults and some valuable properties of the Gingona family allegedly ransacked by some of the security forces members in Santa Catalina. Honorable Chairman, the forced evacuation or the City Ordinance number 413 in Zamboanga City implemented even without the declaration of the state of calamity. The barangay officials and the villagers were forcibly vacated from their houses and no one left to secure the community. Then after that, the barangays Riondo and Mariki started to raise to fire. Wherein surrounded by security forces, wherein 3 to 5 kilometers from the ground zero, and turned out 5,670 houses on the mentioned barangays were totally damaged, not by shelling, not by mortars and bullets, but by fire. The second question, Your Honor, since the local government declared forced evacuation, is the government be responsible on the safety of our properties left from looting and burning? If so, they should compensate for the damage of properties of the IDPs. A month after, the Office of the National Defense and the DPWH mentioned in their interviews that nobody will allowed to go back to Riondo and Mariki, later supported by the local government and approved on CMC resolution that mentioned barangays are declared no-build zone areas until further notice. The danger zone stated on NIPAS Act, which was refuted by the DNR Regional Office for the identification of places of Layag-Layag, Leha-Leha, and Simariki, as what the local government insisted, reasons in prolonging the stay of the evacuation centers and transitory site is that the NHA is still constructing the permanent housing, but till now not yet started. And further reiterated by some members of the City Council, we can only return back to Riondo and Mariki provided we have land titles, Your Honor, to present. They are just making fun of us for securing a title on seawater for the IP's Badjao and Presidential Proclamation 472 given on October 11, 1965 by then President Macapagal, and Presidential Proclamation 1458 given on July 5, 1975 consists of 23.4 hectares by then President Marcos as Muslim settlements for a total of 29.1 hectares. For the information of this committee, my great-grandfather on my mother's side, Mr. Alfred Moro, he was already occupying Zamboanga City as early as 1900s. He became the first Boy Scout of the Philippines that was first organized in Zamboanga City by Lieutenant Sherman Kaiser in 1914, but my forefathers never intend on grabbing land of many. On the other hand, my grandfather on my father's side is one of the signatories as recipient on the Presidential Proclamation 472 as Muslim settlement for about 5.7 hectares by then President Ferdinand E. Marcos on October 11, 1965. But unfortunately, the left copy of the signed documents burned during the siege. After the siege, as recipients, we organized the settlement as Homeowners Association, myself as their president, representing the 657 families that need the assistance of the national level from registration, documentation, subdivision, to acquisition of the said lot, so that the government will not aspire for any developmental projects that will affect the said lots in the future. Number one recommendation, Mr. Chairman, we recommend to add on its provision to respect the ancestral domain for indigenous people like Badjao, and many proclamations awarded to the recipients for that purpose. Recall the CMC resolution on no-build zone for IP Badjao areas in islets Leha-Leha, Layag-Layag, and Simariki. They need this water to preserve their culture and traditions, to rebuild their lives again as fishermen, as cities farmers.
You said CMC resolution. Ano yung CMC?
Crisis Management Committee.
Crisis Management
That was
Committee.
resolved, and now the LIAC.
Okay, proceed.
Layag-Layag and Samariki, they need this water to preserve their culture and traditions, to rebuild their lives again as fishermen, as seaweed farmers. They don't need to be relocated to elsewhere to plant vegetable and trees. They are badjaws. As manobo in inland to fish and farm seaweeds, our brother IPs in the sea need the body of waters to enjoy life on their own, and especially they need water to park their boat and bintas. Number 2, to have a cultural sensitivity for non-Christian IDPs and IPs. On the distributed food packs must be halal, meaning meat must be slaughtered in Islamic tradition, separated from pork and chemicals. Second, on the burial assistance, Muslim dead must be buried within 24 hours and cannot wait for another days to secure death certificate, to secure barangay clearances, doctor certification as prerequisites on this WD burial assistance for only 1,600 pesos. And thus, the NCMF, the National Commission on Muslim Filipinos, and other Muslim groups to fast-track the basic needs or service for Muslim IDPs. Because we have seen in the bill, there were no provision stating the needs for the IPs and Muslim IDPs. Ang katotohanan, maraming biktima sa Mindanao po, mga Muslim. Number 3 po, to have a one-stop processing desk at any evacuation centers, transitory sites for the request of birth certificate, identification cards, marriage certifications, and other important documents for IDPs considering their papers were damaged by fire or other factors. Since these mentioned documents are needed in health services, burial proper identification, financial assistance basis on awarding housing, durable solution, and abroad for employment. Number 4, to have a special care on IDPs when it comes to admission of patients for medication, on presenting documents availing medicine aside on what is given to the members of For Peace program of the government, and exemption on pertaining documents to avail less hospitalization, doctors' fees, and laboratories to lessen the burden of the IDPs. Number 5, Section 23, Line 7 for the Muslim-dominated areas and ARMM that NCMF commissioners must be also included in monitoring and compliance. Alam po namin ang estado ng Pilipinas, tayo po ay may hirap, lalo na ang Zamboanga City, hindi po kami nagreklamo ng anumang ibinibigay po sa amin. Be it known that the death toll at the evacuation centers and transitory site based on our counting reported to us by the volunteers on the ground as per record is already 225. This is not to include the death of home-based IDP who can afford to rent apartments, who stayed on the relatives, and those who returned back to their respective provinces. The counting of the city health is lesser than ours. That is because they already recorded those who availed financial assistance and reported to their office by the CSWDO on the centers. In addition, Mr. Chairman, we hope also that this law is enacted to executory so that the 46,000 IDPs in Zamboanga City remain from its original number of 120,000 will enjoy the rule of law that our beloved country is providing. Send us home now. The government is not starting yet the housing projects. In that, suppose they started it just last June. If the construction of the housing is by phasing, why not allow us to use the other phases while constructing the phase 1? Rather than transporting us from one place to another 15 to 25 kilometers from the city and not welcome by the residents. Minsan po, pag tinatransfer yung IDP, nag-arali po yung mga barangay na ayaw sa amin. Nakakahiya po. Of the host barangays, we are planning for a transitional justice to penalize those perpetrators from attacking Zamboanga, looting our properties, burning our houses, and exploiting our people. The CHR 9 investigate or document at least the victims from displacement to the arrest of minors and IDPs at the evacuation centers. The said financial assistance also remind the CHR 9 to abide with the CHR advisory for no-build zone. We can hear from them, the CHR 9, supporting the move of the security sectors not to recall the no-build zone policy on that area. The CHR National, headed by Commissioner Manuel Mamawag, the IDP focal person, is our partner and savior when it comes to our rights protection and rights to return. We wish to thank the good senator who introduced an act protecting the rights of the displaced person and penalizing the acts of arbitrary of internal displacement, or the IDP bill for having the UNPID as the primary basis in protecting the rights of the IDP, and specification that this committee stipulated on this bill. We hope and pray that this bill will be approved and will not be vetoed again for the second time by the President. Maraming salamat po sa pagbibigay ng halaga sa amin. Sa ganitong bagay ay magbibigay ng dignidad sa amin hanggang sa aming pagbabalik sa aming mga tirahan. Kami po ay nanawagan sa ating gobyerno na magkasundo na po kayo. Kami pong mga sibilyan at maralitang Pilipino ang kawawa na hindi namin kayang bumili ng aming sariling bahay, na hindi namin kayang maghospital ng aming mga kamag-anak. Kayo po ang nasa taas, hindi naman po kayo apektado. Magkasundo na po kayo. Mabuhay po kayo, tayong lahat. Mabuhay po ang bansang Pilipinas. Maraming salamat po.
Wow. Very good points raised. Very interesting points. Yes, yun nga, kung yung hanap buhay mo nasa tubig, dapat doon kayo lagay sa tubig, ba't kayo lalagay sa lupa? Hindi kayo pwedeng pagpatuloy yung hanap buhay nyo. Well, yes, I'd like to say also that my family, my cousin here, my nephew here, si BG, magkatabing barangay kayo, no? Santa Catalina at saka Rio Hondo. Yes, their house was demolished by the fighting, and they also were ransacked. They also lost a lot of properties. I would like to have a copy. I see that you're reading it, so I would like to have a copy of your statement. I'd like to go into it some more. There are some very interesting points, and we should look into it further. But thank you so much for coming here and sharing with us your story, your griefs, and your angst. At rest assured po, I'll try to make sure that this bill can address your concerns so that in the future such suffering and miscoordination will not happen again. Okay. Mr. Gamal Hassan has spoken. Yes, I'd like to acknowledge the presence of Senator Chis Escudero, who just passed the budget, the national budget yesterday. Good morning, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sorry, I'm not wearing the proper uniform. But Mr. Chairman, I'd like to say on the record, we passed this bill in the last Congress.
Yes.
It was actually passed by the House as well.
Yes.
But unfortunately vetoed by the President. I hope the members of the executive department who are here present will give us their input so that whatever reasons the executive may have to veto this in the last time won't be in existence anymore. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Escudero. Yes, they're taking care of it right now. We're crafting the new bill. Okay. maybe we should transfer from Zamboanga City to Tacloban Leyte. Gamar, could you please give the mic to Miss Emilita Montalban, our barangay captain in Barangay 88, I think na doon ang epicenter ng pagtama ng Yolanda, hindi po ba? Sige po. Go ahead.
Good morning po, Senator Gingona, Senator Chis Escudero, and UNHCR Head, Sir Bernard, and to everybody, good morning to all of you. I am Emilita Montalban, the barangay captain of Barangay 88, which was the hardly hit during Typhoon Yolanda. Before Yolanda, we have more than 11,000 people. After Yolanda, we have only more than 10,000 people left because we have more than 1,000 people died during Yolanda. 1,615 houses have been totally washed out, and the rest were heavily damaged. And I was so sad for that. And during typhoon, 2 days before Typhoon Yolanda, our city mayor called us a meeting with all the capitans, and he instructed us to move out the people in our barangay to the evacuation center. And some other people are hard-headed, so they died because they did not evacuated. As of the moment, we have more than 842 families in the transitional shelters. And ang problema po, yung hanap buhay at saka yung iba po nagpakaproblema sa tubig. Nahihirapan po sila doon. Pero ang city government naman po ang nag-aayos ng lahat. Pero dahil po sa kakulangan ng pondo, nahihirapan po ang city at kailangan po silang matayuan ng permanenteng bahay. Nahihirapan din po kami na maiayos yun dahil sa kakulangan nga po ng pondo. Ang problema din po, yung hanap buhay nga po dahil 60% ng total livelihood is fishing. Dahil po ang barangay namin, ang location po, napapalibutan po kami ng dagat. Kaya po, iyon ang naging dahilan kung bakit ang barangay namin ang sumalo doon sa malalaking alon. Para po maging safe ang mga tao, kailangan po silang ilipat sa northern part po ng Tacloban. Pero meron din po doong dagat na pwede pong ipagpatuloy yung kanilang hanap buhay. Yun lang po, kailangan pong ng arrangement pa. At saka po yung water system po, mahirap po doon sa north. Kailangan pa pong ayusin. Ang health and sanitation po, marami pong problema, nagkakasakit po. At gusto ko na i-grab ang opportunity na pasalamatan po ang UNHCR kasi po in the first week sila po ang pumasok, tumulong sa barangay namin. Sila po ang nag-provide nung immediate need ng mga tao sa amin, yung tents, tarps, solar lamp, which is the most popular. Maraming salamat po, sir. Maraming salamat po. Yun lang po ang masasabi ko.
Salamat po. Miss Ramada Jose, you want to say something also? From Rio Hondo also, Zamboanga City. Sige ma'am, nasa iyo po.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh. A pleasant good morning to everyone. I am Ramada A. Jose, 42 years old, a resident,
Pakilapit yung mic.
yes, a resident of Rihondo, Zamboanga City. Hello. A mother of 9 children and a housewife. My husband is working at a shipping line and we were running a small family business. Before siege, I was a full-time mother who spent almost all of my time in taking care of my kids, especially when going to school and get to bond with them in weekends. We were living a simple and happy life with a peaceful community and neighborhood. During the war, we were so unprepared. Me and my husband first ensured the safety of our kids and told them to pack some things and stay temporarily at Grandstand, which quite far from the war zone. After the war, the impact of the siege in our lives changed us so differently. Our simple earnings got froze. Our house got burned and nothing was saved from our things. My kids was forced to stop from their schooling because almost all of them are studying in the nearby school. As an IDP, in my more than 1 year and 2 months stayed at Grandstand Evacuation Center, I have witnessed the sacrifices and hardship of all the evacuees because I was the one who catered them as a volunteer peacekeeping force and WFS facilitator of violence against women and children. As a women facilitator, nagbibigay po kami ng session sa kapwa naming IDPs tungkol ito sa karahasan laban sa mga kababaihan or gender-based violence. Pangaral upang sugpuin ang karahasan, subalit nanaig pa rin po ang karahasan sa kadahilanang sa sobrang depressed na nawalan ng hanap buhay, marami po nawalan ng bahay. Marami po sa kaso sa loob ng Grandstand lalo na sa Bausi. Ito po ay binibigyan namin ng guide sa pamamagitan ng referral pathway. We encountered number 1 is youth organization, fraternity, age 12 to 17 years old. They called the Red Dragon. And MDM means matay di matay. Nire-recruit ito galing sa labas. They required hugging and kissing as an alternative form of their hazing, in which mostly the involved are minor age. This was already validated by the DSWD. Sa sobra po na bahala kami, kapwa kong IDPs na mga magulang, dahil sa hindi na maganda ang environment. Samot-sari na ang taong nakatira sa loob ng evacuation. Sa ngayon, karamihan sa kanila may mga nag-aasawa na sa kapwa din nilang miyembro. Naniniwala po ako pag ito ay hindi nabigyan pansin, ang magiging anak nila na sana po ay wag maging salot ng lipunan dahil bukod sa menor de edad, nag-asawa, wala pang pinag-aralan. Pangalawa po is physical abuse to children from age 1 and 2 years old. Depressed mga tatay, hindi na po sapat ang kanilang kinikita. Problema sa pang-araw-araw at sa bahay na nawalang, kaya napagbubuntungan ng galit ang mga anak nila. Kadalasan humihingi ng gatas ang kanilang anak at may lagnat pa, subalit wala silang maibigay. Bossy women serve as breadwinner to their family. May mga kaso po sa evacuation center na ayaw na nilang mag-report sa threaten ng kanilang mga asawa. Sa kanilang asawa, may mga tungkang magpapakamatay, umiinom ng lason, dahil nais nilang tuldukin ang pag-abuso, pangbubugbog ng kanilang asawa, pinipilit silang maghanap buhay. Number 4, prostitute. Cut off supply for food pack as March of 2014. Cases of prostitution due to family income. A report includes a mother with 2 children who engaged in prostitution for the sake of her family. It is said that it was also due to lack of everyday necessities such as food and medicine. Stabbing, number 5. Problems within neighboring tent. Kadalasang mismo magkakapatid nagtatagaan, hindi lang isang kaso, iba't ibang pamilya. Ito po ay nai-report na namin sa Central Police. Sa sobrang sikip na ng tent, wala na pong privacy sa maliit na bagay lang. Tungkol din po ito sa work for food na hindi na-validate at sa munti nilang kinikitang isda na nakanilang hanap buhay. Hindi na nagkakaintindihan. Number 6, rampant theft and robbery and drug pushers. Ito ang pinakamalaking problema sa loob ng Grandstand. Halos lahat po kami na biktima na ng pagnanakaw. Maging ang aming sampayan at mga balde na aming supply, di na rin po pinalagpas. Simula na stop na po ang supply ng food pack, hanggang ngayon di na maubos-supuin ang mga magnanakaw. Human trafficking are present inside. Number 7, the evacuation center. May mga biktima na turnover na po namin sa Visayan Forum at na-validate ng DSWD. May mga na-recruit na underage na babae. Palitan ang kanilang birth certificate at pangalan upang magtrabaho sa iba't ibang bansa. Ito ay aming na-prevent as WFS facilitator. Nagbibigay po kami ng session pangaralan ang mga magulang makaiwas ng ganitong uri ng karahasan. Sana po. Number 8, increasing rape cases from age 7 to 16 years old. May kaso din po ng rape na nabuntis at nanganak na at paulit-ulit na ginagasan ng perpetrator. So bago po ako malis doon, pinakulong na po nila ang salarin. May mga bata na halos parehas din ang mga edad, 7 years old na ang babae at 12 years old ang lalaki. Nagdudulot na rin ng rape sa di alam na kadahilanan. Number 9 is death of IDPs inside the evacuation center without formal burial. Kahit may tulong ang DSWD, ito po ay hindi sapat. Worth of 1,600, pinaka-maximum to po is 2,500. Di agad-agad makukuha, lalo na sa ngayon, cut off na rin ang tulong ng partabangan worth 5,000. So ang ginagawa na lang po namin ay mag-ambag-ambagan na po kami para within 24 hours mailibing na. Kapwa kami IDPs, minsan wala kaming maibigay, kaya problema din namin ito. Number 10, remote transitory site evacuees which could affect our education, the education of our children in schooling nearby our place. Sinabihan na po kami ng DSWD na hanggang sa December 15, 2014 na lang po kami mananatili sa grandstand. Kailangan na po kami mag-transfer sa Masepla, Mampang or Bugok for recovery settler. Ang sa amin po, sobra po kami dihado dahil sa tagal na po namin na nagtitiis sa loob ng evacuation, sa evacuation pa rin po ang aming muling pupuntahan. Ayon po sa IDPs na naunang pumunta doon sa sobra din ng hirap, bukod sa malayo sa town para maghanap buhay, wala pang tubig, at may mga residente sa kalapit na barangay, kinukonsonada ang mga IDPs, hinihingian, minsan binubugbog. Kaya karamihan sa kanila bumabalik sa loob ng evacuation at nakikitulog kahit hindi na sila validated manirahan sa grandstand. Yung ibang mga badyaw bumabalik na sa kawa-kawa upang doon na sa kanilang bangka matulog. Dahil simula nang umalis sila, giniba na po ang kanilang tent at sa hanggang ngayon umaasa at naghihintay makabalik sa dating tinitirahan. At nagpapasalamat po kami sa ICRC dahil sila lang po ang nanatiling tumutulong sa amin hanggang ngayon sa pamamagitan ng Cash for Work. As a representative of IDPs, we cater and help these people to express our problems to the government. We want to shout out the government that we want to go back to our residence as soon as possible. We want to end our sacrifices inside the evacuation and we want to fight for our rights to return to our places. Ang makabalik sa aming tahanan ang tanging solusyon para mawakasan ang paghihirap naming mga evacuees sa loob ng grandstand. Salamat po.
Salamat ma'am at pahingi rin ng kopya nung sinabi nyo sapagkat napakahalagang punto yung mga sinasabi nyo. Very alarming. Of course, everything you said is alarming, but alarming talaga yung na banggit mo may human trafficking pa na nagre-recruit, pinapalitan pa yung birth certificate.
Yes, sir.
Terrible, no? Tapos dinadala sa ibang bansa.
Opo. Galing sa labas.
Sa Sabah, sa Malaysia.
Kasi marami po doon nangangailangan ng pera, so pumupunta po ang mga tao sa loob, kinukuha nila ang mga teenager, ino-operan ng ano. So kami naman po, inahabol namin, mga magulang nagreklamo na sa amin, bakit daw may mga birth certificate ang mga anak nila, bakit iba na daw? Tapos dapat wala silang yung medical na free dito, pero dito na daw sa Manila kukuhanan ng birth certificate.
Ganun po ba? Oo.
Ganun po. Ang offer
Sa Tacloban po, walang ganyan. Wala naman. Okay. Mabuti naman, Tapos yung isang punto napakahalaga na, alam nyo, parating pag may evacuees, yung talagang binibigyan, dapat naman bigyan ng pansin talaga, yung mga women and children, Pero yung mga lalaki, may depression yan Dahil, if you cannot provide for your family, you get depressed. And the depression gets deeper and deeper as time goes on. And sometimes they can't deal with the depression. They, in turn, take it out on their families themselves. Instead of being providers, they now take out their depressions on their families. So, yung One magandang punto dyan is yung paying attention to the psychological health of the members of yung mga lalaki dahil malakas ang psychological tama sa kanila. Okay. Let's go to Zamboanga City, local government. Councilor Benjamin Gingona. BG.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Buenos dias a todos. Last year, Mr. Chair, Zamboanga City suffered a lot because of the siege caused by the MNLF Miswari faction group. And Zamboanga City suffered a lot because 120,000 plus individuals were displaced. In fact, Mr. Chair, I was one of the displaced IDPs also because I was lucky because I had relatives outside the war zone, so I had a place to stay in. But again, I saw the suffering and the hardships that the evacuees and the victims experienced. Regarding the forced evacuation, Mr. Chair, the City Council passed the ordinance based on the recommendations of the CMC to pass the forced evacuation because we were thinking, we had in mind the safety affected victims of the war. We were trying to save lives instead of properties. We were putting our priorities in perspective. So that was the reason why we passed the forced evacuation. And as regards, Mr. Chair, to the going back first to the areas, I think the logic behind that, Mr. Chair, because before houses were really cramped into small places. When there are fire incidents, fire trucks are having a hard time putting out the fire because they couldn't access the houses. So I think they wanted to plan it carefully so that will not happen again in the future. Again, Mr. Chair, I just want to give a brief spot report on what's happening now.
Pero hindi na sinasabi you require yung titles ng mga residents.
Because again, Mr. Chair, if I'm not mistaken, marami rin po mga, what do you call this? Yung walang titles, yung, how do you say, informal settlers. So it is very hard, Mr. Chair, because it's the first time that we experienced this kind of situations in Zamboanga City wherein talagang large scale yung disaster, the man-made disaster. As of now, Mr. Chair, from 122,000 individuals, we are down to 22,000 po. And yes, the government is doing its best in terms of addressing the needs of the evacuees. But again, it is still not enough. I agree with Mr. Hassan, marami pa pong kulang. But again, we're doing our best. In terms of the livelihood, today, we're conducting a livelihood summit for the IDPs. And then on December 4, we're going to have a consultative meeting with the Bajaus because I agree with Mr. Hassan that they need special attention because they're unique. The culture is unique from the rest of the IPs. So again, Mr. Chair, we would like to manifest the support of the local government of Zamboanga in the passage of this bill because hopefully, well not hopefully, sana wala na pong mangyari ganito, but if it will happen, we are better prepared in addressing the needs. So again, hopefully we will pass this bill and it will provide a concrete guidelines for Zamboanga City and other local government units will be experiencing any disaster. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, let's go to Central Mindanao. Representing the Mindanao Tulong Bakwit, Director Rose Ibrahim Ebus. Ma'am?
Magandang umaga po sa ating lahat. Yung aming pong grupo, tiningnan po namin yung bill at ito po yung aming nakitang baka pwede pa pong bigyan ng further na discussion.
Sige, go ahead.
Sa Section 2 po, yung declaration ng policies, yung affected families po, yung tinitingnan po namin na baka pwede pong ma-include. Section 2, Declaration of Policies. Kasi po, yung IDPs po kasi, ang definition is yung nagsilikas. Nakikita po namin sa aming grupo na yung affected po ay biktima rin. Biktima rin siya dahil pag host communities yan, minsan hindi rin po nakakapag-aral yung mga bata dahil ginagamit po na evacuation centers yung mga
What you're saying is not only those who evacuate, but the host community is also
biktima rin po.
and a victim.
Paano po siya,
Because,
kumbaga, yun yung nakikita namin na paano po siya ilalagay na hindi lang po yung nagsilikas, pati po yung host communities. Pangalawa po yung Section 3, isasama po sa definition ng terms yung affected population. Sa Section 7, sa Section 7 po, yung clear distinction po ng indigenous people at saka minorities. Kasi po parang pag tiningnan po namin yung anong ibig sabihin, definition ng indigenous people is kasama po kami, kasama po yung mga Muslim settlers na sa definition po na nakikita. Pero doon sa amin, magkaiba po yung sinasabing indigenous at saka yung mga Moro, yung mga Muslim. So baka pwede rin mayroon kasing indigenous yung ginagamit yung sa NCIP, mayroon naman sa mga Muslim na NCMF. Baka pwede pong distinction ng indigenous people at saka yung minorities. Sino yung belong dito? Pang-apat po yung Section 10, yung assistance during displacement. Meron dito kasi sa line number 18 to 21 na sinasabing, the military and the law enforcement agencies conducting operations shall provide immediate relief and humanitarian assistance to IDPs, families, and communities. Sa experience po kasi namin na pag armed conflict siya, pagkasama yung military sa mga providing assistance, nagiging vulnerable yung mga IDPs. Pagkasama kasama kasi sila sa operation, pagkasama pa sila sa assistance, parang merong
What you're saying is leave the fighting to the military and the relief operations to civilian organization, government civilian organization.
Lalong-lalo na po sa armed conflict na
Mr. Keblat, you want to say something? I see that you want to say something.
Thank you very much, sir. Just in relation to that point, let's be clear. You know, in a situation of internal displacement as a result of armed conflict and or as a result of situational generalized violence, which may include, for instance, what is regularly termed as REDO, we have to accept the fact that the armed forces is part of the executive part of the government and as such is labeled as what we call in the humanitarian IHL jargon a party to the conflict as defined by the Geneva Convention. And it is the ambiguous role that the brave members of the AFP are called upon in a context of at the same time being part of the hostilities as defined by the Geneva Convention, but also On the other hand, being part of the solution, so to speak, by providing the necessary space and conditions for humanitarian assistance to be channeled to the people who are experiencing forced displacement. I'm looking at it through the prism of forced displacement, whereas I'm sure my colleague from ICRC will look at it more through the prism of the Geneva Convention. And I think we should relax in the sense that there is nothing wrong, and it's well defined, well codified after 60, 70 years of experience around the world and so on. The interaction between the armed forces and the humanitarian part of an emergency response is something which is very delicate, but which works. And in some instances, I recall, for instance, the last June, near Pikrit, when the AFP was called upon to fulfill their mandate, and they did it impeccably, trying to avoid as much as possible collateral damage by trying to assess what they termed in their jargon as a threat through the presence of a non-state actor, BIFF, not to name them. Now, the non-state actors were physically living surrounded by civilian communities. Now, I've served 32 years, sir, in operation around the world. I have never seen throughout my careers the military who takes the care to call the humanitarian community the night before and say, tomorrow we're going to go into an operation. We will need your help, the humanitarians, in order to address the outstanding needs of people who will be forcibly displaced as a result of the guns, as a result of the military activity and so on. Now, that should not be looked at negatively, in our opinion. I think this is an act of courage by the AFP to take this risk. And that shows the very responsible manner with which the armed forces of this country have adopted biennial as part of their central part of the military doctrine, the internal peace and security plan, in order to reconcile these two imperatives. Yes, we, the AFP, are vested with the mandate by virtue of the constitution of this country to protect the right of the people and therefore conduct military operation in restoring law and orders. On the other hand, it is also AFP responsibility to provide the necessary condition for humanitarian assistance to be able to reach in a very indiscriminate manner all the victims of displacement. That is a very difficult exercise, which in my very humble opinion I think is underappreciated in the way it is very often reported in the newspapers. And the situation is not black or white. It is made of all kinds of nuances. It is very difficult. It is very challenging. And what is very encouraging here in this country, as compared to many situations where I've served around the world, is the degree of dialogue we enjoy with the AFP on all these issues. And I'd like to place that on records, that we have to remember that the AFP, the apparatus which is tasked to restore law and order, has also the role to provide the necessary condition for humanitarian assistance to be channeled to the same victims of the same displacement. And that clutch gas exercise is a very, very delicate. And very often around the world, contrary to the Philippines, what do we observe? It's either heavier on one side or on the other side. Here in the Philippines, we could safely say that that very thin, delicate problematic is well handled, and it's difficult. I'd like to, if I may, sir, with your indulgence, revisit a little bit as an example the situation in Zamboanga as of the 9th of September. If we put things in perspective, within 21 days of combat operation, pitting a non-state actor with a government, we had roughly 126 persons, some of them present around this table, who had experienced forced displacement. 126,000 persons. That's a lot of people. Yet, on the other hand, if we compare this with the number of people who unfortunately have died as a result of the restoration of law and orders, we take note, excluding the non-state actors, the combatants who were physically lost their life as a result of this operation, there were only, and I put a lot of quotes, only 12 civilians who lost their lives as a result of this exchange of fires between a non-state actor and the law and order forces. Now it's 12 too many. And I'm the first one to regret it. And I still remember Ethan, 3 years old, who unfortunately took a bullet right in front of his skull while in the arms of his mother trying to run away from danger. Now it's 12 too many. But I can assure you, Mr. Chairman, that under similar circumstances around the world, given the problematic of the situation on the ground and the care which was taken by the military apparatus, we could easily have had 10, 20, 30,000 casualties under any other normal circumstances. And I'd like to put that in perspective because, as I said, it's 12 too many. But I humbly ask you to take my words on this. If we do a comparative analysis with similar type of conflict, and I'm thinking of Bosnia, I'm thinking of Rwanda, I'm thinking of Somalia, the death toll would have been much, much higher had this preoccupation, which was in the mind of the senior decision makers, was not available. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. That is a testimony to the professionalism of our members of our armed forces. Sige, let's continue. Ma'am Rose, please.
Panglima po na section is yung section 11, pareho lang po. A point of clarification din sa doon sa the military and the law enforcement agencies conducting operations. At susunod po yung section 21, rule of the CHR. Point of clarification din po sa letter D. Sinasabing to render financial assistance as its sole directions, as well as psychosocial intervention and similar services to IDPs, and issue necessary guidelines to implement the same. Baka po yung relevant doon, lalo na sa psychosocial activities, is yung DSWD. And further to this, suggestion for the CHR to have close coordination with the DRRMC focal agencies which can be considered during the drafting of the IRR when this bill becomes law. At panghuli po yung section 23, monitoring of compliance. A suggestion to look at the prospect of including the National Commission on Muslim Filipinos as member of the Interagency Coordination Committee that shall be tasked to periodically monitor the compliance with this act. And last, a point of clarification on the letter H of this section on the phrase used as a representative of human rights, non-government, and human rights groups. It is a former refers to the IDP focus organizations. Kasi pag sinabing human rights, alone, marami pong human rights na organization. Salamat po.
Okay, thank you very much. The International Committee of the Red Cross, you have anything to say, Miss Attorney, how do you say, Eve Carr?
Yes, Your Honor.
Cruz Ferrer,
Yes.
ma'am.
Good morning, Your Honor. On the part of the International Committee of the Red Cross, we reiterate our support for this specific bill. In fact, the ICRC would like to also express its commitment to continually support those who were affected by and displaced by reason of armed conflict and other situations of violence, as well as natural calamities. Now, on our part, Your Honor, in terms of the bill, we are happy to submit a position paper with specific comments on the provisions and would like to emphasize the need to harmonize the same with Republic Act 9851, which is the Domestic IHL Act. And we would not be expounding our position line by line at this forum and would rather submit it to the committee for proper consideration.
Nasubmit na ba? Wala pa?
Actually, Your Honor, we've submitted in the past different position papers on the various versions, but we will be more than happy to submit by next week a version considering this particular
Yes,
bill.
please. Yung mga resource persons, no, yung lahat, kung pwede lang, bigyan nyo kami ng paper, no? Position paper nyo para, siyempre, iba yung, of course, may transcript tayo, pero iba rin talaga yung may position paper para mahimay talaga natin ang husto. Mr. Kerblat? Sir?
Magandang umaga po. First of all, Your Honor, thank you very, very much for inviting us in this very constructive debate. And we feel very honored to sort of bring our sort of little contribution around the table. First of all, as an opening statement, UNHCR fully supports the fact that this beautiful country is taking every single measures to face an issue which is very complex, very delicate, very complicated. The internal displacement. As you have rightly and very eloquently recalled, the Republic of the Philippines is subject to, on account of its geography, on account of natural disasters, but on account also of remnants of tension, political tension, very often the subject or the theater where internal displacement occur. Now, it is to the credit of this beautiful nation that, as exemplified by today, people are facing the issue and not brushing it under the carpet. What we witnessed today, I can assure you that there are millions of people around the world who would also like to benefit from what I called one of the purest form of application of democracy. The fact, Mr. Chairman, that today we have around this table various members of the executive, but also cross-representation from the IDPs themselves, their local managers, barangay captain, people who day in, day out face this reality in trying to alleviate the plight of their kababayan as soon as they are victim of forced displacement. That is, to us, a purest example of the application of democracy allowing debate. We may not fully subscribe to views expressed here and there, but we as an organization, UNHCR, what we welcome is the fact that people are allowed, empowered, and benefit from the circumstances to express their views and contribute to the elaboration. Now, why are we here today? There are globally in the world 66 countries who are currently experiencing internally displacement. And among these countries, there are few of them, a couple of dozens, who are struggling through their legislative process to try to equip themselves with a legal framework to deal with this question of internal displacement. Now, Philippines is not only in the starting block, but Philippines has already taken that race and is well advanced in the advancement after 10 years of deliberation around this draft law which is under consideration today. Now, let's not minimize the complexity of the issue. And if it has taken 10 years to mature that process of reflection, drafting, and advancements, it is to show that this issue is extremely complex for a state to face its responsibility and say, yes, we have internal displacement. How do we go about it? How do we legislate? And we should relax about the fact that it has taken 10 years because, unfortunately, there are many countries around the world representing millions of people who would never, never have the luxury of having a legal framework at their disposition to deal with the issue of internal displacement. Now, we've conducted within UNHCR a very subtle sort of comparative analysis of the various drafts which are under consideration by various parliaments, from Azerbaijan to Bosnia to Colombia to Sri Lanka and so on. And we are of the opinion that if and when that current draft is passed, enacted into a law, that would represent a couple of things. One, that would be the first one in Asia, chronologically, to be passed, certainly in Southeast Asia. Number two, it would constitute the most advanced, visionary, comprehensive text which may exist. And I can sincerely, confidentially share with you that we've already had a couple of parliaments around the world, from Turkmenistan, Colombia, and so on, who have heard about ideas which are being sort of experimented here in the Philippines, who are knocking at our doors, say, could you please facilitate an official visit? We'd like to learn about best practice as they're being engineered in the Philippines. Now, this is all work in progress. This is still at the draft level, But I would like to assure you, Mr. Chairman, that should that committee and the following steps in the process would yield that current draft into a law, that would constitute certainly an important brick of best practice to be added to the wall around the world, which is being built by the international community in order to deal with the issue of internal displacement. Now, why is it so complex and complicated? An IDP, as defined by the current draft, is more or less the same as a refugee who benefits from a convention. The only major difference is that the refugee cross internationally recognized border. An IDP remains within the international border of that country. And therefore, there is no way in the world that we can even dream, not even 2, 3, 4 generations down the line, for the international community to resolve it through the adoption of a convention. Simply because one of the founding acts of the United Nations, issued from the San Francisco Conference in 1945, stipulates that the cardinal angle is the respect of the sovereignty of a state. And how to conjugate this, how to marry this with the necessity to also respect the rights of individuals who are experiencing internal displacement is very complex. Therefore, the only tools we have at our disposal is a text of soft law, which is called the United Nations Guiding Principle on Internal Displacement. It has taken a few years to elaborate, and I'm happy to signal to this esteemed committee that Attorney Sage, who currently works now with the Commission of the Human Rights, was the executive assistant to the father of the United Nations Guiding Principle on Internal Displacement, Professor Walter Kelly, who has visited the Philippines already 4 times, who is a strong supporter of this current effort, who has had very important high-level discussion with the executive, Secretary of Justice, and so on, to further acclaim, support, encourage the advancements of this current exercise. And we are very fortunate in this country through the presence of Attorney Sage, who is one of the best resources in the world on the issue of UN Guiding Principle on Displacement. And she happens to be a Filipina, so we should welcome that. Now, if I may, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to revisit a couple of things which were said this morning, which are very important towards the advancement of this brilliant text, which is currently in draft. Why is it important that we remain convinced to adopt this legislation? Well, let's take a few examples that we've heard this morning. Day 4 into the conflict, Thursday evening, 9 and 13 of September 2013, the municipal team under the leadership of Mayor Ben Climaco was struggling with a very simple issue. Our kababayan are living in 8 barangay who are penetrated by non-state actors, armed to their teeth, and using this civilian population as a shield. How do we, municipal team, resolve that issue? And the only recourse that Mayor Beng and her team of brave municipal workers had was to pass this ordinance, which was alluded to, 1418, and if I'm not mistaken, Thursday evening around 10 o'clock. After a lot of internal debate, how do we go about drafting that text, which paves the way for mandatory evacuation of people in order, as was stated earlier, in order to preserve human life? Now, very soon on the Friday, buzz starting to go viral on the social media, and people with a lot of good intentions but totally uninformed about the situation, thousands of kilometers away, principally in the United States, Philam, by and large, starting to initiate a movement and say, oh, the government of the Philippines is taking arbitrary actions and violating human rights of our citizens. Sorry. If we look at the provision which currently exists in the body of IHL, namely the United Nations Guiding Principle on Internal Displacement, Principle 5, 6, 7, Paragraph 2, Alinea B, all the conditions are spelled out there in this text to say, relax lang po, the action being contemplated by the team under leadership of Mayor Beng is in full accordance with the existing body of international humanitarian law. The point here is, at Mayor Beng at that time and her team had the benefit of taking references about what is being considered here by this committee as a draft document, her task would have been made so much easier in taking the right decision in protecting and assisting her kababayan affected by the conflict. And these 4 days, Monday to the Thursday, which was the first phase of displacement in Zamboanga, where the people managed to evacuate themselves away from the combat area to save their lives, was further reinforced by the judicious decision taken on the Thursday evening. On the Friday morning, around the president in Zamboanga, they were the key decision makers of this country. The LG Secretary, DSWD Secretary, Chief of Staff General Bautista, Secretary Rene Almendras, and I'm forgetting a few of them. And they were kind of mesmerized by this internal debate taken by the municipal team and say, is this right what we're taking? We provided in a record time, very quickly, through Secretary de Lima, a legal analysis to confirm that indeed that decision, which paved the way for the adoption of Municipal Ordinance 1418, was indeed in conformity of international humanitarian law. Very simple point. That dilemma that Mayor Beng and her team late into the night on that Thursday, 13th of September, was facing, I can assure you, Mr. Chairman, that this kind of dilemma is faced possibly by dozens, if not hundreds, of LGU mayors, local leaders, and so on, day in, day out, in the absence of such a draft which is now under our consideration. So the choice is ours, this committee. If we want to move ahead on the adoption of this legislation, first of all, it will render great services in terms of smoothing out the decision-making process, as in the perspective of an LGU, you know, who can look behind in terms of benefiting from a legal framework which is in existence. So that's very important, because that dilemma happens in Pikrit, happens in Mitsayap, happens in almost on the every couple of weeks here and there. Right. We talked about 418. Now, we talked also about another aspect of the resolution of displacement in the context of Zamboanga, but also in the context of the millions of our Kababayan affected by Yolanda. Let me start first with Yolanda. Few figures, few numbers. There are 193 member states which constitute the United Nations. Out of these 193 member states of the United Nations, 124 member states of the United Nations have a population which is either equal to or inferior to the total number of people affected by Yolanda. That is a lot of people. Out of these 14.2, it is estimated that 4.1 were forcibly displaced from their habitual place of residence, and therefore do qualify by what is defined in the draft under your consideration, which would be the first document ever that this government has at its disposal in order to define the people who are experiencing forced displacement. And that, we salute that effort, if and when this current document is enacted into a law. And God forbids, but as we all know, the new norms, unfortunately, we may have to expect future Yolandas in the years to come on account of climate change and many other factors. And the staggering numbers of people who are affected by this kind of phenomenon, although it's nobody's fault, but they deserve to be looked at under the special circumstances whenever they experience forced displacement. For instance, a couple of mentions were made this morning about the question of restitution of civil registration. Simple piece of paper which allows citizens to afford a decent burial in dignity. Now, experience in Yolanda has shown, and it's nobody's fault, but the impact of destruction also affects civil documentation. Affecting civil documentation is not only a piece of paper, it is the link to the citizens to a whole body of law and rights, which then prevents him or her to accept. And that takes time to restate. That takes time to reinstate. That's why we plugged in support of the effort by DSWD, but also local registers and so on, to quickly look at ways and means to resume the reassurance or recreation of civil registration. Major handicap, major problem, major on the daily lives that our kababayan are experiencing out there after any disaster. And
yes, let me interrupt there by saying that, yeah, I do remember from their testimonies, siguro, Ms. Emilita, siguro ang daming, halos lahat nawala ng dokumento, no? Mga ID, kung ano-ano. So later on, yung pag-identify na ako si ganito sa PhilHealth, sa kailangan talagang ma-reconstruct, no? Pakipindot lang yung.
Lahat po na-wash out, totally washed out po lahat ng documents. Ang tumulong po yung IDLs at saka yung UNHCR po para maibalik yung mga live birth certificate.
I see. Pati si Mr. Hassan nagsabi na yung mga dokumento rin, na nasunog. Lalong-lalo na siya, nasunog pa. So literally, nawala talaga.
Kasi ang problema po, Mr. Chairman.
Oops, pakigamit lang.
Ang problema po, during sa admission ng mga pasyente, hindi po ino-honor kaagad yung mga less natin sa mga discounts, yung mga 4-piece program, kung walang identifications. So doon po nahihirapan lalo yung mga IDPs.
You mean during the siege, hindi...
Kahit yung after po, yung may nagkasakit. Yung ganun pa nangyari. Tapos may mga gustong magtrabaho, kailangan po din ng mga dokumento. Tapos pag kukuha naman, kailangan pa rin yung mga pinaka-basic. So yung mga pinaka-basic din po, kailangan gastuhan or kailangan may certifications.
Yes, thank you. So that's one facet that we took for granted. That when you get hit, you start from zero. You have to prove you're a person, so to speak. That you're in fact a resident of this place, that you're in fact this old, that you have to prove your identity. And that's certainly worth looking into as to how we can facilitate that in the future. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you very much, sir. Just to highlight the fact also on that very issue that we should also look at a very innovative, creative formula which has been devised under the chairmanship of Regional Governor Mujib Ataman in the context of ARM for, current ARM. Where they have adopted, because of the necessity to catch up with under-birth registration as a legacy of the years of conflict, a very simple concept, free birth mobile registration. So I'm just indicating it's a bit away from the subject at hand now, but the absence of civil registration, forced displacement, there is a link between these two problematic, which are often observed in a condition of mass displacement. And quite innovative formula, together with DSWD and Governor Mujib, have been experienced within the ARM. Our very humble wish is that formula could potentially be replicated at the national level. And I close the brackets.
Could you repeat the name of the program?
A free birth mobile registration. Basically, the issue is the following, in 2 words, if I may. As a result of decades of conflict, mainly in certain part of ARMM, a lot of people continue to give birth. But to go through 1 or 2 AFP checkpoints, I'm talking about a couple of years ago, and disburse the equivalent of 480 pesos in the through admin fees and registration fees and so on, that represents 2 major handicaps. And if you put yourself in a perspective of a very marginalized, often landless farmer, a Bangsamoro farmer from Mindanao, the conditions are not there to have your child registered, simply.
I can understand.
Just if I may, just to conclude on our overall presentation, in support of this legislation, we take for granted in this beautiful country, because we take for granted the fact that it is a necessity to assist and protect IDPs. And this government, from the top level all the way down to the LGU, what I've observed ever since I arrived in this country as a guest since Ondoy, 26th of September 2009, I have seen an incredible amount of dedication, professionalism from the DSWD, from the armed forces, from all the branches of the government, all the way down to the LGU. And I mention this because Principle 3 of the United Nations Guiding Principle stipulates that, first and foremost, the responsibility to protect and assist the citizens experiencing forced displacement rests with the states. I'm sorry, I'm restating the obvious in the context of the Philippines, because you are all so collectively generous, compassionate, humanitarian when approaching the plight of our kababayan whenever they experience displacement. But I think it's worthwhile recalling it, even if it's not explicitly mentioned in the text. The text itself, if and when passed as a law, as I said earlier, will definitely constitute an example of best practice where other member states of the United Nations facing a similar problematic will certainly look at as a point of reference. And that's why, just to conclude, UNHCR 1 supports, applauds, and wish you well in the deliberation, which hopefully will lead to the adoption of this text into a law. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Kerblat of the United Nations Commissioner for Refugees. That issue on having papers, reconstituting papers so that you can identify yourself, I would have wanted to put it into this law, but maybe it's just so that we can have this passed as soon as possible. Maybe that would be right for another piece of legislation, and we can think, I'm going to consult our friends who've gone through the trying experiences and get ideas as to how we can address that situation. Okay. Okay. Okay, don't worry. We are serving lunch, so. Okay, now we go to the government agencies. DSWD, Yusek Parisia Taraji. Ma'am, where are you? Oh, in front of me. Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Honorable Senator. On behalf of the DSWD, allow me to express our department's full support for the enactment of the proposed bill. But we would like, however, to present some of our suggestions, if it can still be
yes, ma'am, of course,
accommodated or considered. First is on the definition of terms. We would like to suggest that we use the term human-induced disaster instead of man-made disaster to refer to the human activities such as mining and logging that may trigger disasters. On the prohibited acts of arbitrary internal displacement, we would like also to suggest that we should clarify that the implementation of a large-scale development projects by the government only be considered as prohibited act of arbitrary internal displacement if not justified by compelling and overriding public interest and done without the necessary relocation, resettlement, and reintegration support services. On the rights during and after displacement, a subsection on employment and social protection may be added to cover the internally displaced persons' economic activities. Minimum standards of working conditions must be respected for certain categories or persons who are made to work during situations of armed conflict. Uncompensated or abusive forced labor should be prohibited. On the provision and access to basic necessities, psychosocial services, as earlier pinpointed or stressed by our resource persons, psychosocial services must be part of the basic intervention package for internally displaced persons in the identified relocation areas. These services are to address the group's psychosocial and emotional needs. And I took note also of your points that we also have to give special attention to the men who are affected by conflict, because they are equally also are in need, and more importantly, if they're being the head of the family.
Yes,
is already
definitely,
affected.
definitely.
That is the point. And the last point that we would like to also suggest, there should be a specific provision on the proper documentation of internally displaced persons. This is the concern that has been earlier articulated, and we would like to include and to suggest that a mechanism must be improved to easily track the status and needs of the IDPs or any group for that matter affected by conflict or disasters. Yun lang po ang pwede namin may sabi dito sa as an input of the departments.
Yes, could you just submit I see that you're reading, so could you just submit the position paper? Thank you very much. Your points are well taken. I guess yung sa development, the projects, the focal word, the important word there is arbitrary. Maybe if you want, you can make arbitrary, unjust, and oppressive. Ayun. Ha? Pwede ba yun? O tama na yung arbitrary? Okay. From the Department of Justice, State Counsel, Angeles Natividad, ma'am.
Good noon to everyone. Mr. Chair, the Department of Justice recognizes that the IDP law is a priority legislation for the 16th Congress, and therefore, we have been most active in dealing with this bill, especially in the House of Representatives, where, for your information, we're almost done with the text of the bill in the Congress version. However, we would like to again reiterate our reservations we raised in the Congress, such as provisions on, and we note that they are still in this version on the implementation of development projects in connection with Section 6 prohibited acts of arbitrary internal displacement in relation with the penalties, which we note might be prejudicial because they are among the issues raised by the President in his veto message. However, Mr. Chair, that we are willing to submit our position paper, and we stress that we maintain our all our reservations on this bill. We will be submitting by Monday. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, by Monday, huh? Yes, okay. Thank you, thank you. Okay. From the National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Council, nice name, Miss Lucky de la Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm Lucky from Office of Civil Defense, which is the executive arm of the NDRMC. We would like to convey to Honorable Chairman that we support this House Senate bill to be passed. We support these measures in view of the policies declared in RA 10121, which is the Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Act of 2010, which is to uphold the people's constitutional rights to life and property. And to add to that, the core belief of an international standard, which is those affected by disaster or conflict have a right to life and with dignity, and therefore a right to assistance. All possible steps should be taken to alleviate human suffering arising out of disaster or conflict. And we would like to recommend as well to include the children in, especially in Section 7, Paragraph D, Item 4, to read as authorities concerned shall endeavor to involve those affected, particularly women, children to include, elderly persons and PWDs in planning and management of their return, local integration or resettlement elsewhere. Also in Section 9, Paragraph F, Item 3, to include the children as well. With regards to the provision and access to basic necessities under Section 9 and Section 11, which is return, local integration, and resettlement elsewhere, the basic shelter and housing should strictly conform with the building code and other structural regulations in consideration with hazard risk assessment made by various government agencies. This is to conform as well to the NDRMC's goal, which is to have a building back principle. A copy of position paper, sir, will be submitted to your office for consideration. Thank you.
When will you submit it?
Sir, next week, sir. As soon as possible po.
O sana next week?
Yes, sir.
I take note of your child-centric emphasis. That's refreshing. Okay. From the Armed Forces of the Philippines, Colonel... Wait, I have a different name here.
That's Colonel Matabia, sir.
Okay, Colonel Josefa Berbigal, you represent the armed forces.
We are, the three of us represents the armed forces, but I am representing the TJAG, or the Judge Advocate General of the AFP.
Are you the proper entity that
The
was
proper
tasked?
entity, of course, is supposedly is the human rights, but we are the legal arm of the AFP, Your Honor.
Armed forces?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so we have Colonel Josefa Berbigal Jags, am I correct?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And Lieutenant Colonel Gerald Naldoza and Captain Gilberto Nohay. Yes. Go ahead, ma'am.
Sir, good afternoon. We are not aware of the previous, personally, we are not personally aware of the previous bill that was mentioned to have been vetoed by the President, but I believe that there are no objectionable provisions on the part of the AAP on this matter. And we do recognize really the fact that the state has to protect its citizens from of course, circumstances like particularly on arising from armed conflict. Indeed, we have witnessed how people, most especially in the area of the Mindanao, that the people have been displaced by reason of armed conflict, and of course, the government has to take care of them also. We would like to appeal, of course, to the persons affected here that the AAP should not be looked upon as an adversary, but a partner to the development of our country and people. And the contribution of the AFP has been bolstered by no less than a foreign observer for that matter. And but basically, Your Honor, we will submit to whatever would be the desires of this committee in order to best serve our people, sir. So we do not have any objection for this bill, Your Honor.
Thank you, Colonel. Lieutenant Colonel Gerald Naldoza, you want to say anything? Okay. Captain, wala? Okay. So wala kayong comments dito na so on the provisions?
Sir, if the committee would desire that we will submit our official stand for this bill, we will do so. We will submit it by next week, Your Honor.
Okay, please. Kasi yung yung dating bill, merong position paper yung ano eh, I think yung order of battle yata yung issue dun eh. Director Karen Gomez Dumpit of CHR, yes?
Thank you, sir. With respect to the order of battle, we have accepted the previous position of the Department of National Defense as well as the Armed Forces to include their own definition, which is actually quite elaborate. Let me just so we revised it to include a order of battle / watch list, or refers to any document made by the military, police, or any law enforcement agency of the government listing the names of persons and organizations that it perceives to be enemies of the state and which it considers as legitimate targets as combatants that it could deal with through the use of means allowed by domestic and international law. And this is, of course, revised according to what our friends from the security sector has given us in the House of Representatives, as well as in the technical working groups and other workshops that we have convened for the purpose of this IDP bill.
So the Senate bill also incorporates that?
Yes, sir.
Yes, no?
As far as I know.
Attorney Natividad of the Department of Justice.
If I may add, Mr. Chair, that that order of battle was already defined in the House of Representatives. It's just too unfortunate that they do not reflect what we have decided, because if you will look at the definition of the order of battle here, it only pertains to state actors. And in what we have agreed during the technical working group, we also include other organizations referring to other
mga non-state actors.
Non-state actors, exactly.
Oh,
It's
dahil
just,
tama nga naman.
Actually, during our, there was this one situation that we asked them to come up with the definition that we have agreed upon. Unfortunately, they don't have copy of that definition. And maybe if we could ask this committee to request a version or definition from the House of Representatives that was the result of the technical working group during that hearing. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So nagkaroon ng technical working group, and then doon sa working group, nagkaroon ng definition that was crafted to include state and non-state actors. Now, unfortunately, hindi na incorporate dito yan. Well, you can just put in non-state actors.
We have called the attention of the committee, Congress committee, and it seems that until now they have not. It was not yet resolved.
Di bale, pwede natin ipasok sa BICAM na yan. Exactly what they said. Okay, non-state actors. Of what for the other people around, what relevance is this watch list order of battle in the context of this bill? Director Karen?
Can we invite our good friend from Balay Rehabilitation Center to expound on the importance of the order of battle? Kasi sila yung nag-introduce nitong provision.
I see. Nasa likod ko pala. Lisa, dito ka na. Okay. Okay lang, wala na.
Kasi actually yung nasa veto message, dahil ang sinasabi doon na walang kinalaman sa displacement yung order of battle. Kasi actually ang order of battle, nandun na yun siya sa anti-torture law. Na kung titingnan nga, nauna lang siya napasa, pero kinuha nila yung definition na yan dito sa IDP bill. Pero ang nagiging rason doon sa parang question is, wala naman daw kinalaman na yung order of battle sa displacement. Pero according to our experience nung Bulyok offense, ang ginawa nilang rason kung bakit sila nagpapaputok at nag-carpet bombing ay hinabol nila yung Pentagon Group, which is on the battle list. Parang ganun
Saan na
ba?
pala yung bulyok?
Bulyok.
No, saan yung bulyok?
Bulyok sa Pikit, North Cotabato.
Sa Pikit.
Noong
Okay.
2003. So, yun yung tumatak din sa amin na ginagamit nila yon dahil ano sila, enemy of the state. Actually, nung nag-ano doon sa Senate na nag-privilege speech si Senator Pimentel, sinabi niya na paano nyo i-explain na you're just running after 10 people and you're using a bomb. So, yung mga ganun ba?
Pero bumang, ang issue doon, yung paggamit ng bomba, hindi yung paggamit ng order of battle. Kasi yung order of battle, that's just a name, no? You can call it a watch list, or you can say the most wanted criminals in the country, and...
Pero yun ang binigay ng rason kung bakit nila ginawa yun, kasi nag-run after sila nung ano na yun.
Okay, let's start. I'll study that very well, because I don't know if that's... The issue here is it arbitrary if you use an order of battle or a watch list or a list called the most wanted criminals in the country? Isn't that enough basis to say that it's not arbitrary because they are in fact wanted?
Ang ano kasi doon, Senator, na...
The ano there, your ano there, let me, so okay lang, no? Parang kwentuhan lang tayo. Ang ano doon kasi, yung paggamit ng bomba, yun, baka mali na yun, ano? Pero yung paghabol ng mga tao, ang basis ng paghabol ng tao, kung mga most wanted criminals yan, para sa akin, may basehan naman ng armed forces natin para humabol ng mga yun.
Ayun pa nga din daw yung rason, Senator, kasi yung running after a criminal is a police matter, not a military
well, sometimes, you know, it's a fine line because, you know, it's a matter of capabilities also. PNP and ANP. Gina de la Cruz of the Office of Presidential Assistant for Rehabilitation and Recovery. I see that you really want to say something. Please go ahead, ma'am.
Only on that note, Sir, Your Honor, only on that note, on the order of battle, it should not be detrimental to the people's security, to the security of the majority of the people in the area. So they could actually parang refer to the order of battle as a reference list, but should not be detrimental to the security of the majority. Parang may art naman ng paghabol.
Yeah, but the issue I think that was stated is yung method used to pursue, di ba, carpet bombing for a criminal gang. But not the issue of the order, the use of order of battle or watch list or that. So sige, we'll take a look at that very well, no? Okay, Philippine National Police. I see, is anyone here from the PNP? Yes, will you say, do you want to say anything? Sandali, please, yan. Please identify yourself, sir.
Sir, good afternoon.
Here, yeah, I can stand up for you. Yeah, it's all right.
Dito ko sa tabi ko para maging senador ka isang araw.
One day, Senator.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and the rest. Actually, I would want to express our apology perhaps because the resource person from the PNP was not able to make it here. Although I'm here to convey, Mr. Chair, that the PNP already submitted, I think, its position on the bill.
Well, anyway, could you just double check kung we're checking now, but if not, please make sure you submit it. Na?
Yes, Mr.
Thank you. From the OPAP, Carla Ravanes, Gonzalo Galang, yes, who wants to talk?
None of us wants to talk actually, but since we're here, I think the senior citizen takes precedence over ladies first. We were actually, just on a short note, after hearing the testimonies from Zamboanga and Leyte and Bohol, I think, I don't know if there's much more to say, since these are actually very personal testimonies, and which actually hit the heart of the matter of IDP. But for us in OPAP, we are concerned with the conflict-related, or the conflict reasons for displacement. Of course, displacement is caused both by natural calamities, but it is also caused by human disasters. Armed conflict obviously is a human-induced form of calamity or disaster which results in displacement. Now, with regards to the bill itself, while IDP per se, the issues of IDP are per se, you might say, reactive in nature, since it addresses the effects of displacement. At OPAP, we also try to look at the causes of the displacement. Is there really a need, for instance, for displacement? Because if there is no conflict, there is no displacement. We support most of the provisions of the bill. In fact, if I may also go to what has been said about the presidential veto, one of the issues which cuts into the mandate of the office is the issue of penalizing both the because the bills which the president vetoed were concerned more with the criminal and civil liabilities of the state actors. But now we notice there is at least one provision that penalizes also the non-state armed actors, particularly the rebel and other non-state armed groups. Yes. However, we also notice that there are issues like, for instance, with regards to, let's say, the conflict side. For instance, I think it was also mentioned here that whenever there are, let's say, groups in conflict, the tendency is for members of the group that is trying to run away from the arms of the law will hide among the population that is already in the evacuation centers or what have you. So, in which case, displacement is both a cause and an effect of displacement. It is a cause because conflict itself causes displacement. You go, like in the case of Zamboanga, but practically every time you have an armed battle between the military, the police, and the NPA, the Abu Sayyaf, etc., you have X number of thousands of people who are displaced. However, when they are already in the camps, evacuation centers, whatever the NDRMC wants to use, they become targets of conflict themselves. They become targets, for instance, of recruitment by non-state armed groups. So we support the provision here which protects the former rebels who will no longer take part in who no longer wish to take part in the conflict. Because one of the main issues in OPAP, particularly of former rebels who want to live normal lives is the security aspect. But do they really feel secure? In cases like whether they are brought to their own communities, but they do not also feel secure at times, especially if the evacuation center is within an armed conflict area itself. So we wish to maybe in the IRR, maybe we can ensure that the evacuation center is X number of meters, kilometers, or what have you, away from conflict areas. In fact, it was suggested by our principal that there may be a buffer zone between the conflict area and the evacuation center, or what do you call it? Sometimes evacuation center is not the word that is used. So, but also coincidentally, our friend from the NDRMC talked about children. One of our colleagues is right now in the CWC, Center for the Welfare of Children, because we are supporting the CSAC bill, which I have to admit which is not moving. We hope it moves sometime. But CSAC are also part or are also among displaced people. So maybe we can reconcile the provisions of the bill that have to do with displaced children. However, we also want to put on record that we thank the author of the bill for having strong provisions on the what we call the cross-cutting themes: the women, children, PWD, and the IP. However, as we all know, that the proof of the eating is in the pudding, so maybe in the IRR, the implementing rules can maybe reconcile the different laws, like one of our friends here mentioned the IPRA. So maybe because we support, for instance, an IDP bill which also takes into consideration the education, the culture, etc. of the IPs. Now, maybe on a final note, as we noticed the interagency task force. We have a lot of friends from the CHR. However, I'm on one note. I'm really wondering if the interagency task force is headed by the CHR. Does this place displacement under the category of human rights? Because we also noticed that there could be overlaps, let's say, with the mandate of the NDRRMC and the other, and maybe even the DSWD. So, which agencies perhaps have the strongest mandate to protect the rights of the IDPs? And also, I think I mentioned it a bit earlier, maybe we can also go to the preventive aspect of IDPs. Because we noticed, I hope this does not offend the author, but there seems to be a one-size-fits-all for the man-made and for the natural and human-induced causes of displacement, when actually if in the treatment and even in the prevention, these are two very different causes, and their effects are also quite different. So I don't know if another bill is forthcoming, but perhaps maybe for strengthening purposes, maybe we can look at the context of both, because though for instance the bill also makes mention of climate change, because certainly, like our friend mentioned a while ago, that the climate change it cannot be avoided, but but sometimes, like in the case of Zamboanga, even the best of shelters can be cause of displacement. So maybe the land use planning, Integrated Right Protection Act, etc. I don't know how, but somehow maybe there should be more agency interaction for a cause and effect blueprint, so to speak. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. NHA, do you have anything to say? Miss Visitacion Aloba.
Mr. Chairman, we fully support the principles and the rights guaranteed by this, which this bill seeks to promote, specifically on the right of the IDPs to access to basic shelter and housing. So as one of the national housing agencies responsible for development of permanent resettlement sites, we would like to be clarified on whether this bill covers what is intended, what is covered already by UDHA, which is our enabling law. So, in the definition of terms, government development projects excludes those which are legitimate. So maybe our suggestion is we should be very clear on when do we consider government development projects as legitimate and thus excluded from the coverage of arbitrary internal displacement. Baka yung coverage po ng UDHA, hindi na kailangang mapasok dito. Katulad nga ng sinasabi ng ating kasama si Mr. Galang na parang ibang approach dapat yung, or ibang approach, or ewan ko kung kailangan ibang batas, or we should marry it all here in this law, na iba yung para sa man-made disasters, sa yung conflict, your approach should be different, di ba? Parang, kasi mapapansin na yung, even the procedures and the entitlements that you give to displaced persons for these kinds of calamities would be different. Kasi like in this one, meron silang freedom to choose anong gusto nila, return to their original places of residence or move to a resettlement site developed by government, or so may freedom of, may ginagaranti tayo ditong freedom of choice, tapos freedom of movement. Pero NHA kasi is mandated to develop resettlement sites for people, as indicated in UDHA, living along danger areas, or those affected by government development projects or court-ordered evictions. So, at saka yung right now, those affected by natural disasters and human-induced or human-created disasters. So, hindi lang kami ang involved dito. Kaya kanina nakikinig ako kay Mr. Hassam. Sinasabi niya na magkasundo na kayo kung anong approach ang gagawin dyan. Kasi the approach to coming up with really permanent resettlement sites, sustainable communities for this internally displaced person should really be a multi-stakeholder endeavor. So, hindi lang NHA ang talagang gagawa ng housing dyan. Ang importante ng role dyan din is the communities themselves and the local government units and the others, kasi ang usual problema po dyan ay yung basic services at livelihood. So, siguro pwedeng emphasize sa bill na to yung role ng ibang other sectors na makaka-contribute sa paggawa ng mga sustainable communities for this internally displaced persons. That's all, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Aloba. Very nice insights. I appreciate that. I appreciate your insights. Lalo na yung sinasabi mo, multi-stakeholder talaga, no? Okay, from the Office of the Presidential Assistant for Rehabilitation and Recovery, ASEC Gina de la Cruz.
Magandang hapon, Your Honor, Senator, Mr. Chair. Thank you so much for inviting the OPAR. We would like to state that we find the proposed bill timely and relevant. Indeed, and as internal displacement has been a long-standing humanitarian yet contentious human rights issue. We would just like to particularly, we will submit the position paper of the OPAR.
Thank you.
Yeah, I have it in me, but I would like to share on specific points with regards to proposing that the actual bill must provide for specific protection clauses that are largely favorable to those internally displaced by reason of natural disasters, of course, and more particularly those with informal settlement status. While it is true that Section 4 of both bills states that the actual primarily provide for the protection of and rights of IDPs during and after displacement, we found out that due reference shall be made only to RA 9729 and RA 10121, but unfortunately, these two Republic Acts has not profoundly defined the rights of internally displaced persons by reasons of natural disasters. So we would like more inclusive clauses that will tackle multiple displacements, but with due recognition also of natural disaster displacements, especially those that have informal settlement status. We are particularly proposing also that in terms of rights, aside from social protection and social services, IDPs must be provided with access to productive resources and capitalization or livelihood opportunities during their IDP status. And as a kind of safeguard during and after displacement, we would like to propose that disaster-proof and service-equipped evacuation centers be provided specifically for evacuation purposes and not just converted for the use of evacuation, kasi po talagang hindi na pwede. Doon din mas napipinsala sila doon sa converted evacuation centers. Kailangan meron na talaga tayong talagang intended infrastructure for evacuation.
Are you saying that no more the school buildings or the stage?
Yes,
Ano yung stadium ba yung tawag dyan sa, sa Zamboanga?
So we proposed na talagang the LGUs must provide for talagang specific evacuation centers.
Siguro also the evacuation center must be standardized, the designs, so that all kinds of hazards, no, from earthquake to floods to, well, if it's man-made, I don't know how you can design something to dodge bullets, but anyway.
Sir, medyo mataas ang requirement pagka bullets, po. And also in the light of the sharing that has been made by by the testimonies of the victims also, we would like to propose a data management system for the displaced, yung disaggregated by gender and age. As we all know, the 14.1 million displacement as has been given by the Geneva-based International Displacement Monitoring Center, 3.5 million women of childbearing age. So, kailangan sana yung data management system natin gender disaggregated so that we can provide
Data Management Center?
Yes, sir.
So you set that up after the calamity?
System, sir. System. It's a kind of a tool, a monitoring tool or a system that are gender disaggregated so that we know how to
like
provide
what happened
services.
in Tacloban, no?
Yeah.
You principally are in Tacloban, correct?
Yes, sir.
You're not in Zamboanga?
We are not in Zamboanga.
Okay.
Yolanda Corridor covers Samar,
Okay.
Leyte,
Okay.
Cebu, and Iloilo. Another thing, sir, is to have a one-stop shop service for disaster-related IDPs to avail of programs offered by a specific government agency kasi para hindi hiwa-hiwalay, they should be afforded and they should know in evacuation centers what are their rights, what are the government services, and how can they avail. So para hindi na po sila na nagtitingin-tingin pa or nagsha-shopping. Kailangan
siguro maganda may mga signages, ano?
Yes, sir.
Anong mga karapatan nyo? Anong problema mo? Saan ka pupunta? Saan yung address ni DSWD? Saan address ni ganito? Saan ka pupunta? Do you have that in the stadium sa Zamboanga? They have that? Mr. Hassan? Meron? Okay. Good.
And lastly po, sir, we do understand that IDPs who were informally settled find it difficult to return to their former places of residences because they do not have security of tenure in the first place in the lands they used to occupy before being displaced. It is proposed, therefore, that disaster-affected IDPs who are prevented from going back to their informal settlement must be given emphasis in this in this bill. So we would like to propose that their rights and safeguards be included in these bills until after the respective claims on land tenure has been settled. Kasi ang nangyari, natanggal sila doon, informal settlers sila, they do not own the land, they cannot avail of any government funding to return kasi hindi kanila for permanent solution, housing solution, hindi kanila yung lupa. But, and then, kailangan meron sa kanilang mas higher, stronger inclusion in terms of government program habang nire-resolve yung land claim nila. For example, in Yolanda, they cannot avail of even international NGO support for housing kasi wala pa sa kanila yung certificate of land ownership, for example, CLOA. So,
but
habang nire-resolve yun.
Why is it so tied up with the ownership of the land when shelter is supposed to be a right to live decently? I mean, I fail to see this insistence on ownership of the land. I mean, non sequitur.
Sir, we are actually in ano din po dyan, very critical on that one, but government projects, I suppose, permanent housing solution coming from the key shelter agencies, they do require ownership, di po ba, no? You do require ownership. So, kami naman from OPAR would like them to avail of a program na kahit hindi pa resolve yung land ownership.
Maybe just issue them a certificate of possession or something like that so that they can go on with their lives. Ms. Aloba?
Actually, iba-ibang forms of secure tenure na pamamaraan. You can even have use of rock. Hindi necessarily ownership.
Oh, yes, right. But is it true that there is this, would you know, if there's this insistence on ownership of the land as a prerequisite to being an awardee to a housing project?
Meaning on the part of the beneficiaries, maybe they prefer the ownership of the land. Kasi
no. Sinasabi nila, wala kang karapatan magkaroon ng bahay kung hindi ikaw may-ari ng lupa. So, kailangan pakita mo muna yung titulo mo. Hindi ganon. Oh, we have a difference of opinion here. Anyway, ma'am.
In different situations, Your Honor, for example, you can go back sana from the original, yung pinanggalingan mo after a disaster, as long as it is not classified as a high danger zone. Kasi kapag
for example, like sa Tacloban, some areas, I understand, have been declared hazardous and dapat din na bumalik yung mga tao doon. Oo.
Mitigation measures that can be implemented. Pero kung halimbawa, pwede pa naman tumira doon, pero dahil hindi nga sila ang may-ari, wala silang title, they cannot go back. It's different naman for other government projects na housing projects na kailangan meron kang title. So there are numerous or multiple situations that they do parang face, critical situations that they do face. So very important talaga, sir, na they are identified, possibly in the IRR of this bill siguro.
Maybe to avoid that situation when there's this insistence on some proof of ownership, maybe we should put some provisions for the local government to issue some form of use of rock that's pointed out. Or, yeah, Attorney Jimenez.
Maraming salamat po, Senator Gingona. If I also may take this opportunity to respond to some of the points that have been raised around the table. But I think we can start with the issue of informal settlers. And I think it's very important to insist that there is an internationally accepted definition of IDPs which do not distinguish if they are landowners, informal settlers, or whatever. In fact, the definition does not even distinguish if you are a citizen of the country or not. So the definition is there, and it's in the bill, and I think that we should accept, as per the UN guiding principles, this definition. I would, however, agree that probably we may, the situation in the Philippines, because we have a lot of informal settlers, this bill may gain some more relevance if there would be a provision that would provide some additional protection for them. There is also an international principle called the Pinheiro Principles, which actually look at the rights of IDPs who have been displaced despite their legal tenure status. And the Pinheiro Principles is accepted all over the world. And in fact, the Pinheiro Principles, we have cited this in the 2 Commission on Human Rights advisories, one for Zamboanga, because informal settlers in the beginning people were saying, but they're not IDPs because they're informal settlers. We had to fight for their inclusion. The CHR advisory in Zamboanga really clearly clarified that they are among the IDPs. The same, sir, with the CHR advisory on Yolanda, which we issued as early as February this year. And there, Pinheiro Principles is one of the set of standards that we are insisting on when it comes to housing, land, and property rights. Again, these are international human rights standards, sir. And and insisting po because international law is part of the law of the Republic of the Philippines according to the Philippine Constitution. International law is part of our law. This is why I am saying insisting, because according to the Constitution, international law is part of our national law. Philippine Constitution po yan. And so the multidisciplinary approach, I think, would also be very important because when we're talking about IDPs, housing, land, and property rights are actually very significant, particularly, sir, if we will be already looking at durable solutions. The situation in Zamboanga, the situation in Yolanda are what we would call protracted displacement. And this does not this is not to the credit, actually, of the Republic of the Philippines if we will have protracted displacement in the country. The last point I would like to emphasize, sir, is also the fact that this bill is about the human rights of IDPs. We all know that. And so on the part of the Commission on Human Rights, we would actually not be very, it would not be very acceptable to us to have different laws for IDPs depending on the cause of displacement. The UN guiding principles on internal displacement is only one, and these are all about the human rights of IDPs with stated causes of displacement and regardless of the cause of displacement. Probably when it comes to the IRR, we could probably look at that, but as a mother legislation for the protection of IDPs, it is much more efficient. It will be much more legitimate, sir, if we only have one law for the human rights of IDPs. This is, sir, I would like to contribute to the discussion.
Thank you, Attorney Jimenez, and I hope you will be there present in the plenary when I defend this bill to help me out for some questions. I do note also, like, for example, our friend Mr. Gamar Hassan, who said his forefathers occupied the land in the 1900s, and that's already ownership for me. That's already ownership, except that it's a difference of culture, and they did not adhere to the so-called Western Torrens title system. But as far as I'm concerned, they do own the land because they occupied it since 1900. Okay. Anyone else before we close? Tapos ka na, okay, Mr. Kerblat.
Very briefly. First, I trust that now everybody believes me when I said earlier that you have here in the Philippines one of the best knowledgeable person when it comes to the question of internal displacement in the presence of Attorney Sage. The previous demonstration is a testimony to that. I'm also seeking once in a while consultation with Attorney Sage in order to fine-tune this point or that, nuances and so on, and I always find the answer to questions. Number two, just joking aside, to reiterate the previous 2 points made by the esteemed colleagues, the ASEC from OPAR and Attorney Sage. Based on my own experience, since Ondoy, Pepeng, Ramil, Santi, Juan, Megi, Sendong, Pablo, Yolanda, BIFF, Zamboanga, etc., every instance of forced displacement, very often in the mind of the general public, in the mind of the local decision maker, elected officials and so on, the whole issue, which has been the subject of the previous round of debate, about the status of the people who are experiencing forced displacement in their relation to land. Do they or don't they have a document which testify to their sort of attachment to that land? Do they occupy it legally, illegally? Are they informal settlers? You name it. The classification of these various categories always comes into the discussion. But just to reiterate the very important point that Attorney Sage just made, for the purpose of this current text draft law, which is under the consideration, the incorporation in that text about the definition of an IDP is very important and should not be, in our humble opinion, watered down or ill-decorated by other consideration. The status of an IDP is not in relation to the economic status link to the land, existence or absence of land title and so on. That is very, very important. And a person who, before displacement, did not have a formal proof of ownership of land on which he or she occupies, does not hamper his status as an IDP, is still has rights who must be respected during, or before, during, and after displacement. Thank you.
Nor should it diminish her status as a beneficiary of programs from the government or from international organizations. Ms. Emilita Montalban, ma'am? Yes?
Tungkol po sa financial assistance, yung po mga IDPs na nandun na sa bank houses and transitional, ang sabi po ng DSWD, hindi na daw po sila makaka-receive ng financial assistance. Ang sabi naman po ng mga kababayan ko, bakit hindi ibibigay sa kanila, yung pagkakaroon naman daw po ng pabahay, babayaran daw nila ng unti-unti according to the NHA. Kung sa financial assistance daw, kailangan nila yun at saka yun naman ay tulong galing sa international din. Bakit wala na silang karapatan na maka-avail ng financial assistance?
Okay. Mukhang nagtatanong si Barangay Captain pero hindi ko masasagot yun. Hindi ko alam kung... Can you answer it?
Yeah. I will check on your concern, no? Kasi anong klaseng financial assistance? Financial assistance at certain point sometimes is given on a one-shot deal. Depende kung anong klaseng financial assistance. Would it be for livelihood? Would it be for medical? Would it be for something short-term assistance for
siguro ma'am,
basic needs?
para maano lang,
bigyan ko
mag-usap kayo pagkatapos nito, Emilita, at saka
hindi klaro yun.
Mag-usap kayo pagkatapos nito. Anybody, Ms. Rose, go ahead.
baka po pwede pag ginawa na po yung, gagawin na po yung IRR, pwede rin pong magbigay ng mga suggestion at saka opinion, lalong-lalo na po yung mga biktima.
Pero alam mo, yung IRR hindi dapat lumabag sa lumampas sa batas yun, ha? Dapat so kung meron kayong bagong idea, kailangan ipasok talaga dito sa batas rather than the IRR.
Siguro sir, doon sa kasi pag IRR na, doon na yung makuti, yung halimbawa yung mga assistance, yung consultation ng anong dapat ibigay at ano yung mga halimbawa naman doon sa evacuation centers, baka in support siguro doon sa may nagsabi kanina na yung evacuation site ba ay gaano siya kalayo sa mga yung military o PNP na detachment, yung baka pwede rin yung mga may consultation doon sa mga biktima. Salamat.
Okay, sure. Okay, so Lourdes Salida of NHA. Yes, ma'am.
Magandang hapon po sa lahat. Ang sasuggest ko lang po, a simple mind, dahil nabanggit nyo na din na pagka hindi nabanggit dito sa hearing na to, mahirap na may ilagay sa IRR. But I think what I'm gonna say is, para sa IRR rather, yung pong para masimulan yung sa identification, pagkuha ng mga documents, maybe we can seek the support, assistance from NSO para po doon sa mga, kung talagang na-burn out na lahat yung documents ng probinsya, of course, o the municipalities, nakapag-submit naman po siguro sa NSO yan. Kaya dito sa central office, they could have, or they can do something about initial documents. And for the lands, maybe the LRA could also support in whatever way they could support, just so their assistance could be sought. Para po, pag ginawa na yung IRR, at hindi naman po natin maaalis nakakailanganin ng identification. So initially, lalo yung mga birth certificate na ganyan, initial na pagbibigay ng pagkilala sa mga IDPs natin, maybe the NSO could also help.
Yes, ma'am, of course. Yes, NSO and the LRA, yes. Okay. Miss Asek, China de la Cruz, yes, please.
For my enlightenment, Your Honor, is there a timeline for a person to be called an internally displaced person? Would it be is it not the responsibility of the state or the government to put parang to assure that
to put an end to his being an IDP?
Assure that he be given good government intervention in terms of protection and everything to be moved back to
on a practical level. I think it's a matter of resources also of the government. I mean, and the scale of the devastation, I don't know, Attorney Cecil, is there a timeline as to being an IDP?
Sir, wala po, sir. Timeline in terms of from time period. There is no time period. Under the Interagency Standing Committee Framework on Durable Solutions, an IDP ceases to be an IDP only if that person has attained durable solutions. Ibig kong sabihin, yung right to livelihood po niya, right to housing, may mga criteria po, and including right to documentation, as among others, have been attained. And the classic definition po is if that person does not have any more needs that are directly linked to the displacement, therefore, that IDP is not an IDP anymore. Pero wala po, sir, na kailangan 1 year or 2 years. This is the reason I brought out the term protracted displacement. Because a protracted displacement is where there are IDPs that still continue not to have, who still continue to suffer from the direct effects of displacement. Yun po yun, sir.
Gamay Hassan.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to clarify with due respect to the Honorable City Councilor dun sa Zamboanga City. We are not blaming the passage of the ordinance for the forced evacuation. But in my statement earlier, I was saying that we are questioning the responsibility of the state since they forcibly asked us to leave the community because marami pong na-damage. Pag sa barangay po ito nangyari, lalo na sa mga clan namin, sinong arson, sinong sumunog ng bahay, siya pong responsible doon sa mga damage na babayaran na kung ilang bahay ang nasunog. So, yun po ang hindi ko po biniblame yung passage. Okay, so second po yung yung point ko po dito. Dito naman po sa regional, like sa Zamboanga City nag-happen, meron po tayong na-identified na 700 families availed the Balik Probinsya program. So meaning to say may nagsibalikan sa Sulu, Basilan at Tawi-Tawi at saka Zamboanga Sibugay. Ang ibig sabihin po doon, mayroon ding role na dapat gampanan ang mga neighboring provinces at municipalities sa pagtulong sa Zamboanga. Hindi po sana pabayaan nilang city na manindigan doon sa mga basic services saka sa mga follow-up dito sa national level ng gobyerno. Mahirap kung wala pong intervention yung mga neighboring cities at saka municipalities. Third po, lastly, yung concern ko po sa regarding sa NHA galing po sa IDPs na partially damaged. Sino lang po ang makaka-avail daw nito? Yung may titulo sa HOMA, doon sa Home Materials Assistance. So sa 10,585 na bahay na sunog, meron po tayong 15% na partially damaged na walang titulo na gustong mag-avail ng Home Material Assistance. So yun po ang prerequisite na hiningi ni District Engineer Indanan doon po sa Zamboanga City na para makabil po ng material assistance, dapat po may titulo. Salamat po.
Siguro you can take a look at that, no? Home assistance, ito yung pang-report ng bahay, di ba?
Yung programa ho ng NHA tungkol sa home materials assistance, directed nga ho dun sa mga partially damaged, 5,000 per family yon. Yung housing materials ang binibigay na assistance na equivalent to 5,000 pesos. So sa case sa Zamboanga yata, meron kayong parang isang dati siyang LTAP, yung land tenure assistance na beneficiary namin, na siguro kaya doon related yung paghahanap ng titulo. Pero hindi namin requirement. Kaya hindi ko kanina naintindihan yung punto ng mga iba nating speakers. Hindi requirement ng NHA na if you want to avail of HOMA, Housing Materials Assistance, o kaya any form of assistance from NHA, why do you have to produce a title? Yun ang hindi ko makuha kanina. Na parang, it's not a requirement, really. So parang baka siguro kailangan imbestigahan namin sa main kung ano yung paano nila inimplement yon. Kasi alam ko yung yung kaso ng Zamboanga, there is a group there which availed of a certain an LTAP program, Land Tenure Assistance Program namin. Pinautangan po namin sila para mabili nila yung lupa mula sa isang private owner. Ngayon, nasunog.
Yes,
nasunog halos yung buong komunidad na yon. So, maybe that case is related. Pero as a policy, gusto ko i-correct na kapag gusto mong mag-avail ng HOMA, okay, any form of assistance sa resettlement namin, you need not produce a title because in the first place, you don't have the security of tenure and you don't have titles.
So, ma'am, would you look into that? You said you'd look into that, and I'll take it up with Chito Cruz. I suppose you're representing the, what do you call him, General Manager? Si Chito Cruz. And Councilor Gingona, you coordinate with NHA and go back to the constituents and report to them why there is such an confusion so that we can solve this misunderstanding. Yes, Attorney Natividad, you want to say something?
Yeah, if I may add, Mr. Chair, maybe not only NHA but also LRA, because basic is the rule that if there is a property, best evidence is the title, and which means that it is under the LRA. So maybe if I may suggest, you also coordinate with LRA on this matter.
Yes and no, because, you know, under the Muslim culture, they don't follow the torrents title system. In fact, to them, land ownership is more communal. So you're taking it from a purely legalistic point of view, but again, we must be sensitive to the culture of our friends, our brother Muslims. Okay, mukhang na-exhaust na natin. Can I call this meeting adjourned? Again, please submit your position papers. Napaka-importante po. Don't forget, give me your position papers by next week, preferably by the early part of next week. And again, thank you for everyone. I think it has been a most fruitful hearing. And thank you again. I hope we can work together again in the future. Thank you for coming. This meeting is here. This hearing is hereby adjourned.